Let's make hat pattern by Simplicity number 8361. This pattern has 3 pieces, 4 if you use the inner ribbon. I'm using wool and lining, and I decided to back everything with buckram. Cut your pieces out of wool, cut your pieces out of lining, and lastly, your buckram. I'm starting with the sides of the hat, sewing all pieces. Starting with the wool, you sew either side, and it makes a big loop. I like to press the seams open as well. Next, I stitch my lining, same shape, and lastly, the buckram. You can press open the seams of the buckram with your hand. Now, attach the hat top. I'm going to start with the buckram. I'm cutting slits along the top part of the hat sides. This will allow you to sew the circle of the top hat much easier. Start by pinning and then sewing just to make sure that it all fits. Now flip it inside out. This takes a little bit, so I sped up the video here. Once you get that all pressed out, you can press it with an iron to make sure that those seams are nice and smooth. This is the side that will be facing outwards against your wool that will be the exterior of your hat. Now I'm sewing the top of the top hat to the sides of the wool, basically repeating the process, but this time in the fabric that the hat is made of. And wool is so lovely that it makes this process a bit easier. Look how nice that's looking already. Now I'm stretching the wool over the buckram. You do not need buckram for this. I thought I'd give it a try so the hat was stiffer. The pattern also suggests that you can use a fusible interfacing. Once I have this stretched over, I'm going to pin the seams together. So the seam where the side meets the top of the top hat, as well as the seam on the inside of the buckram in the same place. And then I stitch it together by hand. This just allows everything to hold its shape a bit better. Now I've had that all stitched together by hand, and I'll show you the inside of what it looks like here in a moment, just like that. And my buckram sides became a little bit longer. That's probably because as you cut the patterns together, the bottom layer sometimes can be bigger. So I'm going to stitch that all together and then trim this extra buckram out so I don't need it. Now I'm going to stitch the top of the lining of the top hat to the sides, repeating the same process. I top stitched the inside and added a label. That is sewer's choice. Now I'm going to begin assembling the brim. I've got my 2 layers of wool and a bottom layer of buckram, and I'm going to stitch them all together. Only stitch the exterior of the brim. Once you have that all done, you can trim little notches all around the brim. This will allow it to turn inside out and lay nicely on that seam. If you don't do this, the fabric on the inside, there's more fabric in the seam and it doesn't have anywhere to go. And this allows everything to lay much nicer. So you flip that inside out and give that a press with the iron. And you should have something that's starting to resemble a nice looking brim. There we go. Next, I'm going to stitch the inside of the brim. This is a based stitch, meaning it's a wide stitch, and stitch it inside the seam allowance because you're going to want to stitch past it. And I'm notching. First here I'm trimming out all the excess buckram on the inside because I don't need that. And in the next video, you'll see me cutting out a bunch of notches inside the hat. I'm doing this in a weird way in this video. For some reason, I decided that folding it was a good idea, but I actually stopped the video and then just went through and made each knot individually. And see how I'm cutting through the stitching line? That's because I'm cutting up to the seam allowance, and that allows to stretch that brim and really get it around the entire circumference of the hat. Otherwise, the brim is too small, so you have to cut those notches to be able to stretch it into place, excuse me. Next, with the lining here, I am simply folding up a bit to create a hem, and I've used some fabric adhesive here to adhere the top of the lining of the top hat to the top of the hat. And now I've gone through and top stitched that brim down to the sides, and I will be pinning the lining in and then hand stitching it. I didn't get a good shot of me hand stitching after this point, but it's a hand stitch. So there I have a fairly assembled hat. Now you see I have a seam along the top part of the hat there where the brim meets the sides of the hat. I'm going to cover that with a cool ribbon bow situation. So I've trimmed a piece of bias tape, and it can be extra long, and I've just folded it in on itself and pressed it down. I'm finding the center of my ribbon by folding it in half. And now I'm starting at one side because I want the bow to be on the other side. So I'm simply just going through and placing that nicely, and then I'll go through and stitch it. I will pin it down, and then I'm going to use fabric glue instead of hand stitching everything down. I use fabric glue because it's not going to get a lot of wear at the top, so simply just tacking it in place with some glue will work just fine. And here it is. This is called fabric tack, and it's awesome. So I'm just going through on the top part of the bias ribbon and gluing it down. And I've gone all the way around, and now see I have some excess here. I've hand stitched that together, and now I'm going to make a double bow. So it's got 2 loops versus, or I'm sorry, it has 4 loops instead of just 2. So I've stitched at the top there, and then I go in and I'm kind of seeing how much I have here. And then I'm going to make another stitch. So that, see how that's a little bit too big of a bow? So what I'll do is now make a stitch about halfway, a little less than halfway down. Right about where I'm indicating there with my thumb. Then when you put it together, you get this cool thing that looks like a nice, pretty, classy double bow versus one bow. Something that will resemble like this. So the step would be to go ahead and make your stitch, and you look like that, and then push it all together. I'm not going to do any stitching here. I'm going to put a pin in it because I'm going to make a wrap that goes around all of it out of this, which is a piece of fabric cut on the bias tape. I press it in place because wool will hold its shape. And I'm pulling it all the way through, and I'm stitching. And as you can see here, I flipped it inside out and I've stitched it down, and now I'm just going to turn it back around so that you don't have that piece of the part that you've pressed showing. And I'm doing a really good job of crumpling my hat in the process. I will say, I don't know if I'm the biggest fan of the buckram that I used. It's pretty thin, and I'm curious about this hat, doing it with just a fusible. I also don't think a fusible is strong enough, but I'd be interesting to know what your experiences are if you also make this hat. So please drop a line in the comments below because I'm curious what you make, and I also want to see pictures too. But this is nearing up, wrapping up this hat experiment, and I hope you enjoyed. I hope you learned a little something, or you feel inspired to make a hat. I'm really into hats these days. Not sure why. I don't know, because they're fun. And I would also like to thank everyone who's subscribed to my channel and all of my Patreons. So thank you very much, Patreons. Please enjoy this tutorial and go and make yourself a festive hat. Thank you very much, and I'll see you the next time.